Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Maggie McKenna. I'm the Executive Director here at the Frederick Remington Art Museum, and I'm so excited to have Mindy and Jami join us today. I came into the Remington and was informed that one of our sculptures was going on tour, and so it was just wonderful to pick up in this moment, because last September I was actually able to meet Mindy and Jami and see this absolutely stunning exhibition at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas. I was so stunned by the process that you went through and the selections that you made. All of the decisions that were made were just so incredible. And so I am incredibly appreciative that you're taking the time to talk to us today and talk about the exhibition that I believe has one more host city. Our piece, Cowboy Fun by Sally James Farnham, is in that exhibition. So we're also very excited to continue to make sure that we're preserving Sally James Farnham's legacy alongside Frederick Remington. And Frederick Remington certainly has his moments to shine in there too, thanks to the Amy Carter Museum and a few other museums. But without further ado, I'm just going to let you get right into it. You have a wonderful exhibition. If anybody is in the area here and would like to see this stunning book, it's in my office. It sits on my desk because I love it so much. So please give me a holler if you'd like to take a deeper dive into this. Oh, one more thing. I just want to also thank the Dr. Badenhausen Fund at the Northern New York Community Foundation for supporting our educational programs this year and allowing us to expand our docent program and start this wonderful series of lectures called FREDTalks. So without further ado, Jami and Mindy, thank you for being here.
And just we'll ask any remote participants on Zoom to hold your questions until the end or to submit them to the chat. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you so much. The Frederick Remington Art Museum is on my bucket list, but I've not been there yet. Jami, have you been to the Frederick Remington?
I have not either. So I'm sensing a future road trip. We can meet middle of where we're located now.
Perfect. Well, thank you all. So Jami and I put together a presentation that includes some installation shots, admittedly from Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. That presentation, which did open a year ago this weekend, in fact. The exhibition has since traveled to the Cummer Museum in Jacksonville, Florida. It's taking a little bit of a break at the moment, but then in the spring will open at the North Carolina Museum of Art. So you do have another chance to visit this fun exhibition. And we are just starting by showing, this was the banner introducing the exhibition when it was presented at Crystal Bridges.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's already been a year and that it's only been a year. Mindy, you're now no longer at Crystal Bridges. You just started a new role, didn't you?
Indeed. Thank you, Jami. So I am now at Indiana University as the director of the Eskenazi Museum of Art. So if anyone is in Indiana, give a shout. Although if you're up in New Hampshire or Vermont, reach out to Jami because you have Remingtons too, don't you, Jami?
We do, although ours is currently in the exhibition.
Right.
We're in short with the exhibition. So yeah, I've been here at the Hood Museum at Dartmouth College for about 7 years now. And I'm really grateful that you are now part of the kind of academic museum community. One of the things that we talked about when we first started working together on this project was the importance of teaching that happens within museums and expanding the narratives that we tell of different histories. And so, Mindy, I'll let you get started because this is a project that you worked on for a long time before I came on board.
Yeah, I think we can go next. So this exhibition is 120 objects. The variety of the objects included in the exhibition from what you're seeing on the screen, from watercolors to paintings, prints, beadwork, and sculpture, and pottery, and textiles. So it's a really wide-ranging group of objects that tells that far more complex story of the American West than something that might be really simplified. I know all of you know well that the West is ill-defined. In fact, it can be all-inclusive. It can be from New York out to California and everywhere in between. And so what we were really aiming to do was show a textured, rich, intertwined story through the selection of the artworks. And next. One of the things we talked about a lot was how do we define the parameters of time in which we're going to focus on the American West? And Jami, I believe this was your kind of idea and brainstorm to think about how a winter count could really introduce the exhibition and start to define some of the ways in which we looked at the scope of the West.
Yeah, so when we were talking about needing to define parameters for the exhibition, as you mentioned, the West is so big as an idea, as a space, as a set of a temporal space as well. We really needed to come up with some boundaries so we didn't have although I think we did at one point have 500 works on the checklist, potential things to put in the show. But we really started talking about winter counts, and this winter count in particular by Joseph No Two Horns that depicts the years from 1785 to about 1922 as a document, a record of history that is not, defined by the U.S. government or by, within, kind of Western structures. We had talked about potentially, the end of the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, the end of the Indian Wars. But we really kind of settled on kind of using this document and the way that this document was constructed as a way to introduce people to the idea of kind of thinking through a different lens or opening up the possibilities for kind of imagining alternative constructions or tellings of history.
Yeah. And what was so wonderful about introducing visitors to the winter count was it was new to many of our visitors, although certainly not all, to think about how one picture commemorates the most unusual or important event in that particular year. So you're looking at each separate picture is one year. And really, it's not the same narratives that always come to the surface when you're looking at a quote unquote US history book, but it might have been that the most significant event in a year was a meteor shower. And so it was stars. And in 2024, I know Jami and I both experienced a full eclipse of the sun, and how remarkable that was and unusual. That maybe that might have been the image that came to the foreground, as opposed to something like an election, which really does happen every 4 years. So what was so unusual about a certain event? And so shifting the way that we tell the stories and really widening that. And that was the first object that visitors encountered to the exhibition. This is a photograph of the welcome graphics that introduced you, and I think it does also summarize a bit of what we attempted to do, which was lean into the knowns, or maybe the common perceptions or stereotypical views of the West with Monument Valley. But we were going to use all the tools at our disposal to also then pull you away from the knowns to add to your knowledge. And so that purple and the orange and the yellow, so the graphics that we used throughout the exhibition were part of that. Jami, do you want to tell how we came to the title?
Yeah, so, we really wanted the title to be something that's active. Throughout the project, we talked about wanting to kind of meet people where they were at and invite them to ask questions, to add to their knowledge, not to kind of use this authoritative curatorial voice to tell people what they should think, but to really invite them to participate in a conversation alongside us, because I think you all are here, you're clearly lifelong learners. And so, kind of wanting to kind of capture that interest that museum audiences have and allow them to participate in building their own understandings and knowings of the West as they went through the exhibition.
So this is a view as you came around the corner. This first section, after you've looked at the winter count, really does give that snapshot of the rich variety in the exhibition. But what I would also point out here is that much like the questions that presented the introduction, in this area, we're asking whose stories about the West do we know? And what we were really thinking about is authority. Who has the authority to kind of share the stories? Who are telling the stories? And one of the first things we really wanted to prioritize was the voice of women. And in fact, more than half of the artworks in the exhibition were made by women. And to be able to present to our visitors, even if you do have a very masculine perception of the West, in fact, how you know the West might have been created by women. In this section, there were only 4 artworks made by men. And another element of the exhibition, so even though the artwork was more than 100 years old as presented, we wanted to make sure that we emphasize the continuance and the continued importance of the objects to visitors today. So in these large text panels, the red and purple that you're seeing there, one of the authors to our catalog was Hunter Old Elk, who works as a curator at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West in Cody, Wyoming. And she's Crow, and so she wanted to write about this lance case. And what she did in the catalog is she also presented an image, a photograph of her aunt at Crow Parade, and there she is pictured mounted on the horse in the large graphic, and really talked about that importance of the lance case today and how it changed functions and meaning over time, but it by no means is something that only lives in the past. So that contemporary relevance was really key to the way that we told the stories.
Yeah, and that's also something that was emphasized in the colors on the wall and the graphic design throughout the show is that all of the works in the show were made prior to 1940, and so having these kind of bold fonts and bright colors really signal the relevance of the material we're talking about, even though historic in the world we live in today, and how it shapes our understanding of that. Another thing that was really important in shaping our understandings of the project was the fact that it was really a collaborative effort. And so in addition to Mindy and I, we had an incredible colleague, Larissa Randall, who is an assistant curator at Crystal Bridges. And we also had a curatorial council of 8 individuals who are named and pictured on this slide, who really kind of pushed to hold us accountable to the goals we set out for ourselves. And so one of those goals was actually the temporal parameters we set on the project, and not relying on contemporary art and artists to help us tell these complicated narratives, and to highlight the ways that people during these times were resisting and telling different stories. And that if you really kind of focus your energy and research on the material culture from the time period, you can tell really complicated stories. And we also hope that this would be a demonstration to other institutions who have really incredible historic collections to dig in and do that work within their own collections, and demonstrating that you don't always have to rely on contemporary artists and communities kind of speaking back to or referring to historic objects, but that there are those conversations happening in those moments.
And another part of hoping to expand knowledge about the American West was we knew that we could also make an impact if we focused on objects in different ways. So much like using graphics to show the contemporary nature of this historic work, really choosing objects that were not just unbelievably beautiful and really outstanding, but in the ways that we did tell the stories. So this Louisa Kaiser basket on the left is it's a masterpiece of weaving. The work on the right from the Hood Museum's collection, Elizabeth and Louise Hickox working together in the California and Sierra Nevada area. You can correct me, Jami. But other artists who happen to also work in those areas and find inspiration, artists like Albert Bierstadt, who traveled to the West, although took their inspiration back to New York to complete large operatic paintings like the Sierra Nevada Morning. Oftentimes when we see Bierstadt's work in a gallery, it really is a focal point. And so how could we use that focal point, but think about it slightly differently? So in this instance, we prioritized and visitors first encountered the baskets made in the same place where Albert Bierstadt found his inspiration. We had a lot of debate and conversation about this. Would this frustrate our viewers, for example, to say, how do we see that Bierstadt? It's like, well, actually, could our viewers already start to see Albert Bierstadt in a different context, a context that had to be in dialogue with art around it rather than on its own? And every time we did have a question that said, well, why are you doing that to Albert Bierstadt? It's like, well, actually, what we are doing is reintroducing and re-emphasizing historic context. When Bierstadt went to the West, he encountered indigenous peoples. He collected Native American art. He brought it back to his studio in New York. So if you were a patron that thought you might want to see a Bierstadt painting and consider purchasing it, you actually saw it in his studio, surrounded by shirts and beadwork and pottery and baskets. So in essence, we were just recontextualizing this painting into a place and a situation where it had been at one point in time. So Bierstadt paints empty landscapes with just little deer. That's not what he experienced as an artist in the West. So these kinds of things, much to what Jami said about not relying on contemporary artists to tell different narratives, we really tried to ourselves be held accountable to making sure that those different environments and contexts were brought to the foreground.
Yeah, and as you noticed with the Louisa Kaiser and Louise and Elizabeth Hickox, we, in addition to including, women artists, for the artists we included, we also wanted to recover their names as much as possible. So often with Native collections and kind of non-Euro-American collections and museums that are historic, the names of the makers, of the artists who created these works were not kept in records. And so there's been a lot of work recently to recover those. But there are also really great examples like the work of Maria and Julian Martinez, who are working at the turn of the 20th century and who are known for kind of creating this Tewa black on black style of art, where Maria, it's this very interesting example of, the woman artist, actually Maria, being more well known and often kind of credited as the sole artist of creating a piece in museum collections, when her husband Julian was also part of the process. So she would coil and make the vessels, and then Julian would paint with slip the designs on them. And so they worked closely together. But oftentimes she was the only one credited with doing that work. And so we wanted to tell these stories of kind of the exception to the rule, where we think of these, artistic couples where it's often the man who gets credit for creating the works. But in Maria and Julian's case, it was often Maria who signed the pieces. there's this really great, Mindy and I spent some time at the Indian Arts Research Center at the School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe, in their incredible ceramic collection. And we told them we were looking for, artists who signed their work. We wanted to have named individuals. And the curator there, Alicia Poon, said, "Oh, I've got a name for you." And she showed us this picture. And, instead of signing the picture on the bottom, or to have this little diminutive signature, half of the design is the artist's name. And so we definitely were drawn to this piece and thinking about, kind of this time in the West and how Native artists and Native women were really participating actively in the market and perpetuating, cultural knowledge and artistic practices, while also bringing in an income to support their families.
And, we wanted to also make sure that it was, again, a very textured conversation and reflection. So it's not as if only the women artists are the Native American artists and all the sort of painters included in the exhibition are artists like Albert Bierstadt. And so Catherine Carter Critcher, as the only female member of the Taos Society of Artists, was important to include, and lots of interesting crossovers with what Catherine is inspired by. And then, of course, you see the vessels and the maker in this portrait. So again, bringing more of that human element to the objects. And I think we also, in conversation with our advisory, used artist once known if we didn't know the name of the artist anymore. Identifying a maker as an unknown artist really erases the maker completely. Just because the collector didn't collect the name does not mean that the person was unknown in their community. In fact, they were quite admired and well known. And so being able to bring that humanity back was really important to us as well. Saddles. I don't think Jami or I ever thought we would curate an exhibition with saddles. And also there's a really great Dorothy Dunn there on the left-hand side, another female artist. But this was the influence of our advisory council. And so Michael Grauer says to us, well, you keep talking about wanting to show cultural influence and generative work on how a form might change. You could do that with 5 saddles. I think Jami and I were like, okay, that's great, but we don't know anything about saddles. You're going to have to curate that section. And so Michael suggested 5 saddles from the Cowboy Hall of Fame's collection, which is where he was at the time. And so you get this rich variety, and immediately, without writing lengthy narratives, we can say through one form, many different outcomes, lots of different ways of designing saddles, and then many adaptations depending on use. So this section ended up being very fun and playful. This was one of the stars of that section. So the Mexican Caballero saddle, made in what is now California, very elaborate embroidery on the seat part. Again, if you know more about saddles, I'm sure that has a name that's not like the seat part, but again, we were learning. So this really wonderful example of a saddle. And again, in this kind of desire to show art by artists from lots of different backgrounds and locations throughout the West, it was important for us not just to show paintings of vaqueros, of Mexican wranglers, and, we certainly had this James Walker painting in the exhibition, but how do you also highlight the artistry of people, by people? And you can see that saddle in the foreground on the left also has or even on the fence there, has that silver horn and some of the comparisons. So really being able to pull out the rich artistry by artists and not just depictions of someone like a vaquero in this instance.
Yeah, and we, I think early on decided that, we weren't going to get ourselves caught up in, very old and ongoing conversations about this divide between art and craft and whether or not something's an art object or if it's material culture, but really that, we are art curators working at an art museum. And if we put it on the floor, then we want people to consider it as art. But we also want to demonstrate that maybe the way that we've been looking at art within, this very kind of Western frame is limiting. And so we can also show the ways that these objects and materials are art and also used in people's daily lives, passed down from generation to generation, and how they hold meaning and relevance to the lives that people have led and continue to lead. And that's why we decorate things and want things of beauty surrounding us in our lives.
Yeah. And speaking of continuance, another aspect of the planning of the exhibition was to engage stakeholders in Northwest Arkansas to really talk about the content of the exhibition and engage individuals for programming. Maybe there was influence on interpretation, somehow again to build relevance for our audiences. And through some of these stakeholder conversations, we were introduced to Jadea Kirsch. And Jadea is nothing but a dynamic personality. She kind of sucks you in. She was the first Black rodeo queen in Arkansas. And you think, okay, well, that must have been a while ago. Not so long ago. That was only in 2017. And she has used, and horses really for her were therapy. This kind of, as her therapist said, if you can control this 1,000-pound animal, you really can take control of your life. And so it has been such an important part of her life that she has also formed a foundation to support women of color and girls in participating in rodeo. And then through that, she also has worked with Wrangler and with Boot Barn on advertising and saying it's everywhere that shows it's just for white men, this cowboy thing. And so she has really worked hard to expand those narratives, even still today. At the opening weekend, I had the pleasure of giving a talk with Jadea. Usually my talks are attended by a dozen people, but when you bring a rodeo queen with you, you'll get 100 audience members in a flash. So we were packed into this room by the saddles. It was really a fun experience.
Yeah. So, this other theme, I think that you talk about, or when you talk about, kind of the persistence of this myth of cowboys as only being white men, that the West was built, by cowboys, or, this dichotomy of cowboys and Indians being, the kind of images that persist in popular culture around our understandings of the West. We wanted to kind of acknowledge that, but also to show what kind of other ideas persisted, what communities and knowledges of those communities persisted in the face of manifest destiny and westward expansion. And so here's the other Remington that you mentioned. So this is a nocturne called Shotgun Hospitality that's part of the Hood Museum's collection. And also this wonderful Navajo weaving, as well as Modoc basket caps. One of the ideas that persists of the West is the idea that, movement was always happening from East to West, and that's how the West was built. But the Modoc were actually removed from California and Oregon to Oklahoma, to Indian Territory. And so thinking about the movement from the West to the East as also part of this history. We also have this incredible quilt that was made by, actually, I'm forgetting.
In St. Louis, African-American, we don't know her name either. Yeah. Another story that came to our attention again through our wonderful advisors was the story of the makers of these vessels. So H. Wilson and Company was formed by 5 men who were enslaved first in the Carolinas and then moved to Texas. After emancipation, they formed the first Black-owned business in Texas. So H. Wilson and Company. If you go to the next one, Jami. So Hiram, James, Wallace, Andrew, and George, all with the surname of Wilson, but Wilson was the last name of their owner, formed a business that made these incredible vessels, quite large. We had 3 of them in the exhibition. They're now in the collection at the MFA Houston, and they sold to Black patrons and white patrons alike. Really used their skills to then, form this business. This was not a story I had ever known of or learned of. And so again, it just begs the question of what are the other stories that are going to come to light once you start really digging in? We have stories. We're ready for all the graduate students out there to reveal and bring even more to light. We felt we could bring in those ceramic vessels because there are so many other ceramic vessels in the exhibition, like this group.
Yeah, so you already saw the saddles and those examples of, how the same form can have so many different variations depending on the community creating them. And, I think native ceramics from the Southwest, from Pueblo people are really well known broadly, even if you don't know much about native art or ceramics. These are kind of recognizable. But with this grouping here, we wanted to show the scale of what people were creating because these are all quite large, but also the diversity and multiplicity of forms and designs between the 19 different pueblos who are creating them. And so once again, to show that, there's not this something that often happens is the flattening of that diversity and experience. And so by showing these similar forms and their individual distinctions between communities, we were also able to, once again, highlight the nuance of these narratives and experiences of different people in the area.
We also just learned so many great stories. Now, this was in the Denver Museum of Nature and Science collection, right, Jami, where you were ages ago, intern? Was that right?
I was an intern, and then I was a research assistant before grad school, more years ago than I'd like to admit. But they have a wonderful collection of Navajo weavings and had recently done some research with contemporary Navajo artists. And one of the stories that was uncovered during that research was this blanket made by a woman named Miranda, who was actually kind of commissioned to create this piece by a kind of women's auxiliary union of sorts. Mindy, do you remember the name of it?
I don't. It was in southern Colorado, though, close to the Four Corners. But then it was commissioned for the Chicago World's Fair.
Yeah. And so, kind of this really interesting archival history. And I think, selfishly, when you're working on a project like this, it can be really stressful and intense. And so Mindy and I and Larissa also spent a lot of time laughing, and we just really loved the kind of short, stocky horses on this blanket, and they brought us a lot of joy. And I think it brought a lot of joy to our visitors too. I know when I showed the image of this to my sons, they also got a good chuckle of it. But when we actually looked at the piece and kind of the technique that it takes to weave this, I certainly know that I couldn't create anything near this impeccable. And just kind of thinking about the role of, women in kind of supporting the work of other women at this time was, not something that, I was really familiar with in these in the history.
Yeah. And I like how it also was so intercepting with these national histories, like being shown at the Chicago World's Fair is also just an interesting story. We again really attempted to be wide ranging in the ways that we included art. And so the Santos, we had several Santos in the exhibition. This one included large for its kind, certainly would have been used probably either personally in small altars or potentially in churches, although these tend to be more private. And the other fun thing that we were able to do with the exhibition and the book, I would highly recommend the book. Thank you for plugging that, Maggie, was we were able to engage young scholars to look at these objects and think about them in deeper ways. And Jami, this was also one of your interns, correct? Who,
Curatorial fellow who's now a PhD student. But, this history of kind of Catholicism in New Mexico and in Santa Fe in particular, where you have, these, the Spanish were there first. Then it became part of what is now the United States, but there were also indigenous people there who pre-existed any European arrival. And so there's really these kind of three communities coming together. So the material culture and expressions of, religious faith have really interesting elements from different communities. And so on this figure here, you can see this woven sash is kind of in a Pueblo style. And the plants that are being referred to aren't plants that you would find in kind of European depictions, but plants that are native to New Mexico and Mexico. And so, and you also see this in Elizabeth Boyd in her portfolio of Spanish colonial design that we also borrowed from the Tia collection.
Yeah. And Elizabeth Boyd, another artist that was new to me, certainly in a public way. She just used the initial E, likely because of those biases against women at the time. Some of the best objects in the show.
I know. We should just give people a moment to look at these. So these are doctor's bags that were beaded. The one on the right is was by Nellie Tu, or actually both of them are. But they're both created by Nellie Tu Gates, who is, an early named artist who was known for creating these bags. And they were either commissioned by doctors who were working with Native communities during the reservation era. And, sometimes as payment for or as a gift for services performed. But they really show, the ways that Native women are taking not only, objects like beads made in Europe. They were getting, glass beads from Czechoslovakia and Italy at the time. And, but beadwork is really something that is recognized as this traditional Native art form. But here, by having them on these suitcases, we also had a pair of shoes that were fully beaded. That demonstrate the ways that, Native women were bringing Western objects into their lives and making them relevant to their own experiences and cultural understandings of places and objects.
Yeah, amazing.
Cradle boards, baby. Let's talk about babies.
Yeah, let's talk about babies.
So, the question, if you can see it here, that we asked in this section of the exhibition on nation building was, what role does art play in building a nation? And so as we think about the West, we really think about, the West as really central to the identity of the United States and to, our nation and its history. But within many Native communities, one of the things that has been a research interest of mine for a long time is the ways that we make objects for children and the ways that we teach children about our culture and our history and the things that are important to know and pass down. And so women, mostly women in communities, spend a lot of time creating these cradle boards that carry and protect infants at this important time in their lives. But they're not just utilitarian, they're beautiful. This one here in the back is fully quilled. So those are flattened porcupine quills that are stitched on to this animal hide. That decoration and the care that went into creating these is also a demonstration of the value that communities see in children as the future of our nations. And so this also came up in these, we had full-size cradle boards, this third installation that shows the variation of different forms. But these are small toy cradle boards. So things that were created for young children, mostly girls, to play with and to have their own cradle boards to put their dolls in. Really shows the importance of passing down certain knowledges, ways of knowing and understanding the world to future generations.
And we, again, really wanted to show how across cultures, there are toys that do shape those future generations. So what is it like to build a nation? You can see this fabulous doll on the right-hand side, the Blackfeet doll that we saw at the Kansas City Museum. And then what about for the white children, likely, that also went to the Wild West show? So these paper dolls are in the collection of the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, so have managed to last for 120 years or so. And imagine like paper dolls that you would sit into a little board that had cutouts, and you could make these scenes where the stagecoach is rushing by and then hunting buffalo and, running across with the horses. And so both of these were in a case together with some cradle boards to really emphasize that part of nation building. This was another aspect of nation building. So I think it's easy to think of how images of Yellowstone and Yosemite have been used to celebrate national parks, to celebrate national identity. And we certainly did have a painting by Thomas Moran in the exhibition, but also prints by Mary Nemo Moran. So that maybe opposite Maria and Julian, Jami, this would be the Thomas and Mary story where Thomas Moran is most prevalent. One of my favorite moments in the gallery was a student came in and he said, "Do you have any Morans in this exhibition?" And I took him over to Mary Nemo Moran. Thomas was around the corner. Little joys, like those crazy horses. But Chiro Obata was another artist that was new to me. And here is a Japanese-American artist, moved to California. And he kept a journal while he did a trip through Yosemite. So on the far right, that is a watercolor and pen and ink drawing. Then he also made, from his watercolors, went to Japan and worked with master printmakers to make a series of prints from his World Landscape series. So again, really thinking about how the landscape also informs nationality. In this case, he was kind of wrestling with what does it mean to be an American. For Crystal Bridges, it was also important to use this exhibition to add to the collection. Crystal Bridges does not have a Remington sculpture, for example, and that could have been an option for the museum to purchase. But where the museum decided to go was purchased a selection of Chiro Obata's work. And so really being intentional about how those stories also are ongoing in the collection at Crystal Bridges. And some of these are now there as part of the permanent collection. Here we have Remington and Sally James Farnham. So you'll see the Chiro Obata that works in the background, and also the Mary Nemo Moran is right there as well. And I do think, I'll admit, Remington fan here. I do think that Remington's Bronco Buster is part of also a national identity story, certainly with it being so long in the Oval Office of the White House. Quite literally, it has become a poster, a sculpture that signals, American rugged individualism. It was such a surprise for people to learn about Sally James Farnham. So we're so grateful to the Frederick Remington Art Museum for lending Cowboy Fun and to be able to tell the story about how Sally James Farnham finished monumental sculpture for Remington. And so again, with that kind of entry wall where you bring people in with monument value and then you add to that knowledge, it was really important to say, yes, Remington is here. Come see the Remington. It's a great cast, sand cast version. Have you ever heard of Sally James Farnham? Let's tell you about her story as well. So that was really delightful. And then Maggie will have to pipe up, but Sally James Farnham's grandson lives miraculously in Northwest Arkansas because if you don't think the world is a small place, you just have to put on an exhibition and hear more. Is that right? Was that his
Great grandson, her great grand.
grand? There you go.
Yeah, so they met me for the grand opening, and I have a picture of the three of us in front of the Cowboy Fun sculpture.
You just never know where these stories will take you.
This is a piece when we visited the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, what we still lovingly often refer to, and it's not in text right in front of me, as the Cowboy Hall of Fame collections. We, we're looking through collections, and when the curator pulled open the drawer and I saw this piece, I said to the group, "Shut the F up. This is the coolest thing I've seen in a long time." I didn't censor myself in that moment, though. But it is this really wonderful saddle blanket that has this plateau beadwork on it, of these florals. But there are these coins with Chinese text on them that are used and dangle from the blanket or from the saddle blanket. And in the installation, we had a recording of what it would have sounded like when these were moving. And it's this beautiful jingling sound. And so one of the extended labels in the catalog talks about the history of these. And these were Chinese coins that were no longer in circulation, but had been brought over and used as ballast on ships. And then when they got here, there was no longer a use for them, and they were used as trade objects, and somehow got into the hands of this no longer known to us Nez Perce woman who stitched them into this blanket. And so just showing that intercultural exchange and use of creative reuse of objects, both as ballast and then as decorative and sonic elements within this saddle blanket, was just like we really nerded out a lot in preparing for this exhibition.
Yeah, and again, another space to grow in is more art by Chinese Americans. That was something that eluded us, and so we were able to refer at least to some of the narratives and stories. Felt like this Joseph Becker painting was more sensitively rendering the Chinese individuals who worked on the railroad than most of the other depictions at the time. So kind of unusual and fun object to put near that saddle blanket.
Yeah. And Mindy, I think you bring up an important point there, which is that, we talked about this, knowing the West as kind of an opening to this, that, we opened up a conversation. And like you said, we really hope that there are future grad students and, other colleagues and, us as we continue our work, who can, find some of these stories and art created by folks from these communities that isn't currently in museums or known in the archives. But, once again, kind of being able to signal, even in small ways, the role that, immigrants and other, Chinese and Japanese Americans contributed to building the West, particularly in California.
And that really takes us to our small concluding gallery, which was, what surprises you about the West? And this also included a rich variety of different kinds of objects, including this wonderful Taos Pueblo by Ida Sturchey, which unbelievably dates to 1915. And the ADM Cooper, of course, was one of my faves back when I was in Cody at the museum. And do we have any other slides, Jami, or is that, oh, we do. Oh, well, there we go. There's Ida Sturchey. And also we were very tickled by this Helen Blumenschein painting of this young woman and her dog. She's about 20 years old when she painted this. This is almost life size. So it's a quite large portrait of this young woman asserting her place very solidly in the West. And that is the end. So if anyone has questions, we do. Oh, Jami, I feel like you want to let's talk about this.
A shameless plug. The book for the exhibition, the catalog has already been plugged. But also, throughout this project, we also were working together. Mindy wrote an essay in a book that my colleague Michael Hartman and I edited, called Re-envisioning Histories of American Art. And Mindy wrote about this project, but we also talked about kind of efforts throughout the field of museums and art history to expand the canon of American art and the stories we tell about that. So if for those of you who are interested in this talk, also wanted to alert you to that publication that came out this year as well.
Yeah, so feel free to ask questions if you have them.
Stop my share so I can see folks.
I'm going to unmute everybody in case there's any.
No, we don't unmute everyone, but people can unmute themselves.
Okay, people can unmute themselves and they'd like to ask a question.
Yeah.
I just want to comment on that this is a fabulous, fabulous exhibition. And I think this, as I was sitting here, it just highlighted for me how horrible the DEI initiative to get rid of it is, because you wouldn't have been able to do this exhibition the way you did it, given current circumstances. I think people learned a lot. I learned a lot looking at it, and I learned a lot about various cultures who contributed their skills and their craft to this exhibition. And I'm so happy you had it. That's great.
You know, one of the things I would say, and I think I can speak for Jami, although I will let her speak for herself, we would have done it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Also was many years in the making, and, you know, it's still going. And I think one of the things I would say is that there's so much important work being done that may not be using the same vocabulary that they did a year and a half ago, but it's still doing the same work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that is a continuation, and I know that I will continue doing this work despite, or in fact, almost because of its important.
Yeah.
So Jami, I don't know if you have further thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's also, demonstrates the value of collaborative curatorial practice and working together, so I'm trained as an anthropologist, not an art historian. And, I learned a lot from Mindy, and Mindy learned a lot from me, and we learned a lot from our curatorial advisory council. Is, for a long time, the way museums worked were, was a curator, brilliant curators come up with these ideas and then they kind of deliver them and speak in an authoritative voice. And I think, now the understanding in our field is, we have a very particular, bias and perspective of the work that we do, and that is always going to be a part of our work. And so if we work with other people who challenge us, who help us see our blind spots, it really just helps us form, to use that multiplicity of perspectives to form, more nuanced and thoughtful exhibitions. And that work resonates more with audiences because audiences are coming with all different perspectives as well.
Yeah.
We have a question in the chat from Patricia, who I'm so excited that you got to see the show at the Kummer Museum. I did not make it down to see that. You asked, how is it decided where an exhibition goes? Not easily. I will say traveling an exhibition, especially of this scale, is not easy. And so we work with a large team of registrars and exhibition managers and folks at, all of the institutions who lend works to the show to come up with a fee, the shipping arrangements. And then, you kind of pitch the show to different institutions and have lots of conversations, most of which end in, I'm sorry, but we can't take this project. And so it really is, museum work. We're we're starting to be more transparent about how things operate and how we make certain decisions. But I think that there's still, like, one of the areas that a lot of people don't know about is, how shows go on the road, and it takes a lot of work, a lot of money. And I think institutions are asking interesting questions about, the sustainability of, large traveling shows like this as, shipping and other costs rise significantly. And as, we kind of turn to, our permanent collections as, the foundation of the exhibitions we put on view at museums.
Yeah, I would get a lot of questions or just assumptions that the exhibition was also going to the Hood Museum at Dartmouth because of Jami's involvement. And in fact, this was a 10,000 square foot exhibition. Jami, what's your exhibition space at the Hood?
We have a total of 16,000 square feet. And so
In the whole building.
Yeah. So we simply didn't have the space. And,
Yeah.
But, I think the Hood had 20 objects that were loaned to the tour. So not all on view at once, some were rotations. And that was, a heavy lift for our team. But for us, it was, a way to kind of share our collection, as you all know, at the Remington, we're here at the Hood, we're a very rural institution. It's hard for people to get to us. And so for us to be able to share our collections and the work that we do with, the tens of thousands of people who came to see the show at Crystal Bridges was also an opportunity for us, without, having the entire show here.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your answer. I know the Remington is interested in traveling shows, and so I was just curious, and you answered it very well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a visual artist, so I'm very interested in color. How you decide to use purple, red, and yellow for the installation space?
Yeah, that I have to give credit to our very brilliant exhibition designer, Olivia Walton. And where she was also pulling from is, that fantastic book. We had brilliant exhibition designer or book designers on that. So Mika McGinty and her team actually really took a look at the material that was sent, and they started picking some colors. And then our graphic designer pulled from some of the colors that Miko had used. And at first, I will admit to you, I had a slight panic when the colors went up before the objects came. And I was like, oh no, is this a little too Pepto-Bismol pink, walls? And then as we started unpacking objects, especially some of those cradle boards that Jami was talking about, it was exactly the color that was used in those cradle boards. The quills were dyed red. The cotton had that pink. The beads, Jami, did I hear you call them Cheyenne pink sometimes, of the beads were the same color as the wall. And really we were trying to go, I said no turquoise and no terracotta. Those were not going to be the colors we were going to use because that was kind of expected. And browns, everyone likes to put dusty browns in a Western show. And so that was a really intentional choice. And again, I'm grateful for book designers and graphic designers to kind of take you there. And what you probably don't necessarily notice is most of the walls were white. Most of them were white. And it was just those splashes of color in the text panels and some highlights. But I don't think of that exhibition ever as white walls because the color really made such a difference. And we had some selected walls of color, but yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. We managed to fill an entire hour talking about art. I don't know what other way you would spend your lunchtime, except for hopefully you all had sandwiches while you were listening. And, think about North Carolina in 2026. You can go see the exhibition. I should have looked at this ahead of time, but I believe it opens in May. So take a
There's
look.
actually a new direct flight from Ogdensburg to Raleigh, North Carolina.
How about that? You're gonna have to take a group.
Absolutely. Thank
It's
you
generally
so much.
much warmer in North Carolina that time of year than it is.
Almost ready where is.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you
And
so
have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Wonderful day. Thank you for sharing in. We're always with us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.